doesn't carry a lot of weight with Instagram followers. Over the last few years, it has certainly become in vogue to sort of jump on the Save the Manuals movement's bandwagon. And while certainly it's true that manual transmissions, sticks have all but disappeared from the production landscape of our favorite exotic car brands at this point, most people don't exactly understand why. And it actually comes down to three different reasons. The first being Formula One technology, the second being the differences between new and used exotic car buyers, and the third being the impact of government. And most people blame it on the first. Formula One technology trickling down into the showrooms of our favorite manufacturers. And that has some truth because yes, in the late 80s and early 90s in Formula One and sports car racing, it did become popular to deploy paddle shift transmissions. Sequential gearboxes gave them massive performance advantages and allowed all sorts of different things. I mean, anyone who's driven a sequential gearbox car on the street or on the track knows what an advantage it offers. The shifts are so much quicker than any human being could ever achieve, and it allows engineers to lighten engine internals and do other things to make the cars faster, as well as giving an advantage to the drivers. They have more time to focus on exactly the right braking points, keep their line exactly right, and focus more on the competitive aspect of passing. It also made the cars a little bit more uniform, which was kind of a disadvantage to the entertainment factor of racing. But also, as we know that racing is really a pay-to-play game, it allows taller people to fit in the cars more comfortably. Because certainly with legs as long as mine, a lot of older race cars with 3 pedals, I couldn't make move. There's just not enough room with highly bolstered seats for me to move my legs around and articulate them so that I could hit all the pedals. But with just 2 to focus on, it becomes a little bit more possible. So if we open up the marketplace of people who are willing to pay to drive race cars to people who are taller, it makes that work a little bit better. And so that's why you've seen a lot more manufacturers roll out these gentleman driving series, Ferrari Challenge, Super Trofeo, and things like that. So the win on Sunday and sell on Monday mentality does still exist, and we do see the technology that is prolific on our favorite race cars come to the production cars, but that's not really all of it. The more significant factor is actually the differences between the mindsets of new exotic car buyers and used exotic car buyers. Because new buyers demand the market perception to be a certain way for them to want something. People who buy used cars years down the road buy a little bit more based on personal preference. And there are a lot of things to blame that difference on. As a new exotic car dealer, you've got a finite number of qualified customers that are actually interested in buying your cars. And you generally need them to buy another new car every 6 to 24 months. That means that in each case, you're going to sell them something that's only a little bit better than whatever they're trading from you. So it creates this phenomenon where new exotic car buyers own cars for a much shorter period of time than used exotic car buyers. The complete opposite of more mundane automotive choices. So for the guy that goes out and buys a new Honda Accord, he's going to own the car longer. He's buying it based on longevity and reliability than a used Honda buyer, which is buying it as the best transportation option for the money, which will generally last a shorter period of time for them. The guy who buys a brand new Honda doesn't worry about his coworkers not wanting to ride in it to go to Chili's after work for drinks because it's 3 or 4 years old. Whereas a guy who buys a new Aventador and just loves the car and takes it to Cars and Coffee every weekend is going to start to get the questions of, well, why didn't you buy a Roadster? Why didn't you buy an S? Why didn't you buy an SV? Are you getting an SVJ? And the answer, I just really like my car and I still want to enjoy it, doesn't carry a lot of weight with Instagram followers. And so as a dealer, when you're trying to sell someone their next exotic car, you're only offering them a minor step up in colors, options, maybe performance, and things like that. And so you're kind of limited by what the manufacturer can provide. And certainly some manufacturers have kind of made these last-ditch efforts to sell more manual cars. For instance, Lamborghini in 2014 built a 50th anniversary version of the Gallardo, the LP560-2, and they were all sticks. Now they only built 50 of them because that's really all we could sell. The ones that sat in showrooms moved pretty well, but they were considerably cheaper than any of the other Gallardo options. And when it was originally conceived by the factory, they wanted to call it the Back to Basics version. And they were all going to be blue Cepheus with orange accents. For some reason, Lamborghini factory loves blue cars with orange accents on them, even though they don't sell very well in the US. So we offered them some feedback, and the car ended up being white with a black interior and red accents and kind of some of the Superleggera options. But it took a while for the market to really appreciate the cars, even to today. They don't bring that much over MSRP if you find one on the used market now. And Aston Martin tried the same thing from 2010 to 2012 with the all-manual V12 Vantage. And those didn't sell very well when they were new, and now that they've depreciated to be worth about half of the original MSRP, they're a great value, and the market started to demand them a little bit more. But that used market will say things like, I don't know why people don't order more new manual cars. There's so much demand for them. And that's where it's actually more of a supply and demand arbitrage, because yes, there are more buyers of used manual exotic cars than there are used manual exotic cars. And that causes the values to stay up. But on new cars, that's just not the case, because there, the supply is matched very evenly with the demand, because nobody was inventorying manual exotics in the late 2000s. They all were custom ordered cars by people who had to have a stick. So there wasn't this surplus of inventory, and there really wasn't that much of a shortage. I mean, certainly we talked to some people who would generally prefer a manual gearbox and to not wanting to wait a year to order their own car, and they would just buy a sequential car. But also at the time, their residual value, which is a huge sensitivity both to buyers and to dealers, so they can keep on trading up, was a lot safer in a paddle shift car. People who are buying under-demanded manual cars new, 5 to 10 years later, are taking them into this high demand circumstance, and that's why we're seeing some of the markets just climb and skyrocket for the values of some of these manual cars. And it hasn't happened to all of them. I mean, there's certainly still some great cars that you can buy as a stick, these V12 Vantages, DBSs, manual Gallardos, manual R8s, and things like that have definitely become somewhat more appreciated than their paddle shift counterparts, but there's still a lot of meat on the bone and there's a lot of money to be made. But as dealers, as we tried to offer those slight performance gains on the new exotic cars that we could sell, that's really where the manufacturer started to run into the third issue, and that is government impact. The US government is to blame for a lot of things in the automotive world. Speed limits, fuel economy, cannonball. All came from the US government's interference in the ways that manufacturers were allowed to sell cars. And if you look at cars and how they've changed over the last few decades, they've gotten bigger, they've gotten safer, and they've made a lot better fuel economy. And those three issues have really driven the manual gearboxes away. Because if they can't make the engines bigger to make cars go faster, and they have to carry all this extra weight, so they need more power through forced induction and things like that, the need for sequential gearboxes to make cars work fast really goes up. It's a lot easier to make a car go a little bit faster by giving it some crazy robotic gearbox than it is to give it more power and more displacement today. I mean, now we've got hybrid systems that fill torque gaps during shifts. I mean, it's crazy, all the innovation, all the things that have really gone into making cars shift better, faster, and more smoothly. And it has its advantages. I mean, yes, the cars are so much faster, but I remember in the model year 2007 when Porsche released the 997 Turbo, and it was the first time that I can recall that a manufacturer advertised the performance gain of an automatic gearbox over the manual, because that was the first time that Porsche in a long time had built their own automatic gearbox. Prior to that, they were just buying them off the shelf from Mercedes. So a 996 Turbo Tiptronic was slower than a manual car, but a 997 was not. I think the difference was like 3.9 seconds for a stick, 3.6 seconds to 60 for a Tiptronic. And I remember hearing that and just cringing, because I knew as manufacturers really started to advertise that, we were near the end of the lifespan of the gearbox that I truly do love. And so now we're met with this modern landscape of exotic car offerings where most of our favorite manufacturers no longer have sticks. And I guess there isn't that much demand because there would be some ways for them to respond, but technologically, on an engineering basis, most of them have gotten to a level now where the way they've built the cars and the packaging they've put on them, they really could never revert back to manual gearboxes. So if you have this dream of owning some manual example of a new car that's still offered, or of a used example that we know the values are going to continue to rise on, you need to probably go ahead and with some haste do what you can to be able to buy one, because I kind of was met with that issue when I sold my last LP640 that was a stick. I got a great offer on it and it made sense to let it go. And I tried to get excited about some other things, but the reality I kept coming back to was that if I didn't go ahead and buy another of my favorite car, a manual LP640, there's just too great a chance that the values are going to climb too fast that I wouldn't be able to buy one in the future and really just not justify it relative to what else $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 would buy me. And so I was really glad to be able to secure it, and I'm excited over the next few weeks to get the car back on the road, because like most sports car enthusiasts, just for me, as great as some of this technology is, there's just nothing like a proper drive in a proper car with a proper gearbox.